So hi all, I am Vijay Jethani, Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft. So for today's session on Hands-on Lab, this is on machine learning, and we will implement this complete architecture from machine learning perspective. Now to build upon step by step, just want to give you or set the context right. We are going to have the build pipeline as well as release pipelines. As a part of build, we will get our machine learning setup ready with the help of Azure pipelines. And then once we have this setup ready, along with our code repositories, what we will do is we will create another pipeline, which will actually help us train the model. Okay, so whatever the data we have, what are the artifacts we have, we will train that particular model, evaluate that model, get that model ready for us to reuse that model. Okay, so that will be our second step. Following there, once we have that model ready for reuse, we are going to deploy this as a binary. Okay, so we have to deploy this as a binary, which we will take care as a part of our release pipeline. Now, once we do the release, this will be again in two stages. One is for us to really test that. So what we'll do is we will deploy this on Azure container instance and test that service. Okay, so that is what we'll have as part of this. And from there onwards, move towards prod. What we'll do is we will create an AKS cluster. Exactly the same model which we tested here will be deployed on production. Now this is a production ready use case for us to consume the same model for us from the Azure machine learning perspective. Now, as you see, this is an continuous integration and the deployment. We need some monitoring as well. So that monitoring we are taking care with the help of App Insights. And as you see, step by step, like while we do the Azure DevOps automation on machine learning, we will create the environment first, and what the services are created, whatever you see, all those services will be created in those particular resource group. Okay. On top of that, what we will require is, obviously, as I said, we need an Azure subscription. Okay, so without that, obviously the services cannot be installed, and Azure DevOps account so that you can automate this whole process. Okay, so while we do so step by step, I think you will understand more on that. But for us to get started, let's go through the prerequisites. Okay, these are the two things which I already talked about. Now, flow of this is again service creation, having the machine learning infrastructure from DevOps pipeline. Okay, for DevOps to automate, we need some automation account. So that is what we call a service connection here. And obviously, we are going to provide some parameters on what the naming convention will look like and all those things. So that is the variable group for. Building on top of that, we will have the build pipeline, which I have shown you just in the diagram, that what we have to deploy or get our model ready with the help of this particular pipeline. Okay, now there are two pipelines here. So that you don't get confused between both of them. DevOps is for automation and ML pipeline is for actually running your ML related workflows. Okay, so when we say the model training, evaluation and decision, it's more towards the pipeline within the ML workspace. Okay, so while we do practically, I think you will understand more on that. And for us to, once that model is ready, for us to actually feel that model, we are creating an image out of that, which we are deploying on ACI, that is container instance first, and running a test on top of that. That container instance is running fine. Following on, we are having the production environment, which is on AKS. So these all is what you will be having today. Also, I will show you, if you are not using ACI and AKS, you can also deploy the services on app service, which is purely optional because in interest of time, at least if you should be able to deploy till step 4. Okay, but if you want to try this as well, you can do so at any. Okay. An important thing again here is to understand what that code is all about. Okay, so we are already taking the sample repository for diabetic regression. I think you already might have seen that for the diabetic use case. We are exactly, because here the data anyway we can bring from anywhere, or whatever sample use case you want to bring, you can use that sample use case. Important for us is to actually get hold of this particular structure or this particular architecture implementation. Okay, so if you understand how we do this right from scratch till we deploy model and monitoring that, you are done with your part of actually automating end to end for ML ops. Okay, so that is what is our aim for today, to get this up and running for the ML. So from code perspective, let's drill down a bit deeper into what these pipelines are, what we have as a part of the sample repository. Similarly, what looks from an ML space, what exactly the YAML files we have, and finally look at the data. Okay, so these are the few things we will look from the code. So let us look at from the code perspective. So let me go to the repository as well. This is how the codes look like. Okay, so as I said, important thing for us to first of all look at how we will create that infrastructure. So for that, there is an environment setup folder. So you have the ARM templates within that. So there are cloud environment.json is what we are going to use. Okay, for initial setup of our ML environment. Then I will show you how to even automate the creation of the inference cluster of AKS. Okay, so what we will do is we will combine these both environments together. So where you will use AKS and the cloud environment created automatically for you. Okay, well, that we will see at later point of time. So from environmental setup, pipeline which we are going to use is IC create environment pipeline. The reason I'm specifying exactly file is because once we create those pipelines, I think you should know what is specifically file names you have to use for those pipelines. Okay, so that was the first thing. Okay, now we have the environment ready with us. What about how the ML look like? Okay, so these are the ML related pipelines, which is exactly running under ML. Okay, so if you see all of these from right from your scoring and training that pipeline and registering that. So all these are specific for that. And you see the Python as well, right? So Python script, depending upon what binaries require and what the dependency it has. So everything is set up in terms of code here. Okay, so this is the another folder to look at. Okay, the third folder to look at is from the diabetic regression perspective. Like what are exactly those algorithms, right? So what are the dependencies you have to take care of? Similarly, how do you evaluate that model, right? So that is also important. How do we evaluate? And if it is for ACI, how that particular config or CPU requirements go for? Similarly, if it's for AKS, what is my requirement for? Okay, because at the end of the day, we have code, we have the binaries which will run on that particular machine learning, but what exact about compute is what this gives for the deployment. Okay, so these all the scripts, I think you can go at your pace once you have this repository with you. Okay, similarly, the last part is obviously the data. So that this is something, the sample data you have. Now this is more to look at based on your some of the medical parameters along with the age, how we can predict whether the person will be diabetic or not. Okay, so this is a sample data we have. Okay, so based on that, the last 155, 70, and what those are parameters, what you're seeing is all about predicting about whether the person will be diabetic or not. So the reason we are doing this is considering the age of that person and all the medical parameters, we can really determine what exactly will follow for a particular age group or for that particular group of people if given their respective medical parameters. Obviously, we are not ignoring the medical test cases, which you do often, but without that, how to predict whether given these particular parameters, whether that person will be diabetic or not. Okay, so that is the just brief about the sample use case which we are using here. So from here onwards, we will concentrate more on how we automate this particular use case on ML. Okay, so this will be on Azure and we'll be implementing the machine learning workspace. Okay, so these are the 4 folders which you have to look through and go through each and every code to understand what we have at present. Okay, now apart from this, to help you with this is again taken from the sample repository. It gives you step-by-step procedure if you're completely new to the DevOps, like what you will require, like create an organization account, how to create project and all those things. So this is what it goes through. Okay, then as this is a step-by-step procedure, you will not get, I think you have the clear link of what is the next step. Okay, so what is the naming convention for the variable groups and how you create the service connection, everything you will follow through this particular repository. Okay, so how you have to name every detail is given in this particular step-by-step procedure. Now to give you a look of the pipeline from my previous run, this is how they will look like. Okay, like today, if I have to say, we will create the ML environment. Okay, similarly, I have to train the model, right? So this is where I will train the model. Once the model is ready, that means consumption is ready for consumption. I will actually have this deployed on ACI. Okay, so I have separated the ACI from the CD part just to give you a look and feel of how we can actually do in the modular fashion. Okay, so CD, this particular pipeline is a combine of ACI and AKS. But if you want to move this out, you can have the ACI part separate and AKS part separate. So ideally what I'm trying to say here is, first of all, creating an ML environment, training the model for machine learning, and then finally deploying this as a pre-production QA environment for us to test. And finally, once we are ready, deploying it to AKS environment for us to deploy this on production. And while this go, we also can have a scoring, how the model is performing, right? So obviously that is again so in short, 5 batch scoring, model ACI, then train CI and ML environment are the 4 main pipelines which we have to create. Okay, and then as I said, like AKS cluster or influence cluster, which we are going to create for production, I will show you how exactly we can automate that as well. So this pipeline is for that. But as of now, don't worry about that. Step-by-step instructions give you all the details which you can go through. Okay, so as of now, just concentrate on this particular while we do step-by-step procedures. We will just concentrate on these steps so that you are not missing any step and are able to do the hands-on lab properly. Okay, so just follow this step by step. That's all. We are done with that. Okay, so let's start with the first part. Now, in any Azure project, first thing you have to create an Azure DevOps organization. You have to create is a project. Okay, so in my case, this project is named Vijay MLOps. Okay, so you have to create this first. Once you have this project create, the next step for you is obviously the clone repository. So you will come to this repository folder and you have to clone that. Okay, so or import repository. So while you click on import repository, I will give you the clone URL link so that you can paste it here. You get that complete detail within your Azure DevOps organization. So by that, you will have the complete code along with the instructions ready in your repository. Okay, now next step after that is obviously to get how we will actually connect with Azure. Okay, so for that, you have to go to the project settings and create the service connection. Now, what the service connection is for? This will be kind of the automation account, which will connect to Azure on your behalf and create the services. So for say suppose the way I have the Azure connection, this is for doing any implementation on Azure. Similarly, ML workspace is just the only the contributor account for ML workspace, just to do the work on ML workspace. Okay, so how do you do that? So just go on to the, if you're completely new to this, I'm just showing in short. So you have to create new service connection, Azure Resource Manager. While you have the Azure Resource Manager selected, just click next. It will ask you on the service principal creation, let it be default for automatic, click next. So if you do have a AD integration or Azure AD integration, which you already have, if you have the subscription, so this will load that subscription for you. Okay, so while it loads the subscription, you have to select an appropriate subscription. In my case, there are a lot of subscriptions because I'm already part of a lot of the demo groups. Okay, so in that case, you will select that subscription which are specific for you. Okay, so in my case, subscription which I'm using is for my internal, right? So I'm just selecting that subscription for my, and in that case, I can also select the resource group specific, right? And give the name and finally grant access to all the pipelines. So new service connection, click on a subscription, okay, and go to the select the required subscription and select the resource group if you want to have that for specific resource group, or even if you leave it blank, it will be applying to complete subscription. That is how you can create your service connection, which will authenticate to Azure. Now, next one we will be doing once we have the ML workspace created. Okay, so this service connection, you exactly the same way, only difference will be now if you see when we created this, we selected the arm, okay, and we collected next. So the this particular automated remains same. From there onwards, the scope was for subscription because we were doing for the Azure authentication. But now for ML workspace, the scope will be only limited to machine learning workspace. So that is the difference between the two service connection which we want to have. Rest remains same. We have to grant the permission on the pipeline so that they can do the work on our behalf. Okay, so that's all for service connection. That is the second step which we did. Now what about what will be the naming convention? So let's look at the naming convention for how do we create that particular service on Azure. Okay, what will be the name for that part? So this again, the same name is being given in step-by-step guide. Just follow that same naming convention. You can also change that, but I think you have to do the code changes if you want to do on your own. Okay, so I would say for simplicity, keep exactly the same name which we want for the this particular hands-on lab. So if you see here, the important thing is what is the base name. This is the name which I have given. I think keep it short, just and unique so that it is only relevant to you. So just I would say just change name from widget to your name. That should be more than sufficient. And then service connection is okay. You can keep it same. Similarly, is for your AKS or the deployment names, you can accordingly change. Okay, and this cluster deployment name we will get from once we create the AKS cluster. Okay. Location, again, you can select resource group name, you whatever you want to create, give a name which is unique to you. Okay. And similarly, if you are going for an optional event pipeline, have the web app as well. And the workspace name which we want to create within that particular Azure. Okay. ML workspace. So just make sure the workspace name is again unique to you, and service connection is nothing but which I've shown you, which will give only access to the ML. Okay, so that is what the name convention is all about, this resource. So make sure this is very handy to you. It is also given in step-by-step guide, but make sure you follow this in a proper sequence. Okay, now we have this. Now let's set up the pipeline which will create the Azure resources for us. So let's go to the pipelines. Now, as I said, we will have a similar kind of pipeline, create environment. So what I will doing is let me rename my previous pipeline to something else. So let me rename this to say original. So I'm just doing it for the sake of so that I can create new pipeline with exactly the same name. Okay. Let it refresh. I think it is taking some time. Yeah. Okay. So while I create new pipeline, it will ask me the repository. Obviously, this is a YAML files, so I have to select repository, and I want to make sure I select the existing YAML pipeline. Okay. Now, while I do so, I have to remember in which folder that was. Okay. So that dot pipeline was a folder. Okay. And obviously, this particular deployment is for my environment setup, right? IAC, which we were selecting for. So we have to select that respective environment. So let's see where we have that. environment setup, IAC, create environment pipe arm. So this was the setup which we had for initial environment creation. So once we know this particular environment and the YAML file, just go ahead. Okay. Then here you will see the two options, run and save. Just click on save. That will create a pipeline for you. Now where we can check that, come back to the pipelines. Now by default, it will give the name of the repository itself. Okay, so just change it to reflect that. So click on the three dots, rename and move, give a name, say create ML environment. Okay, leave it at root. So we have our pipeline ready with us, but before we go, we just want to validate this, that really this will work for us, or is there any problem with this particular pipeline? So within this pipeline, just again click on three dots and try to validate that. If it says validate, that means it's okay. Okay. Similarly, for us to check, yes, this is the variable group which we have created. And there are few connection or whatever I've shown you in the variable group itself. We given some name, right? Azure connection. So this is taken by default from those variable groups. Similarly, whatever the naming convention or the JSON files which we have for this deployment, that is already there. Location and everything is taken care of. Workspace, what we want to create is also taken care of. So let's go and deploy this now. Okay, so what I will doing, I'm just going to run this. Okay, so again, as I said, make sure the service connection names are proper. Also, your variable groups have appropriate naming convention for respective resources. So that's all you have to do and validate that and finally run that. So let's try to run this. Okay, so this will be kind of a environment creation for us on Azure. So, okay, that's okay. So what we are trying to do is we are deploying the MLOps resources to Azure. Okay, so what we will see here is, first of all, our resource group will created automatically. So let's look at the resource group naming convention which we have. So as of now, I only have the test group. It should create ML HOL group for us. Takes some time to reflect here, but that's okay. Yeah, we have this. Okay, now slowly all the resources will be coming here while we go through here this particular deployment. You can also go and while the deployment name is there, first of all, it will try to validate that. Okay, and then start the deployment. Okay, so while it done through validation step and starting the deployment, the other way you can look at, just go on to the deployment and look into that particular deployment. If it goes through fine, I think, or there are any errors, you will see the green or red check marks accordingly. Let's wait for a while. Has created storage accounts, key vault, registry. Now it is trying to create the workspace for us. This will take around 10 to 15 minutes of time based on the reflection. Okay, so still coming up with the workspace part. Yeah, so workspace is there now. So internally it's try creating. So at times this will be it won't launch or maybe some issue during while it is creating. So just bear with until it creates all. So what are the integral components to workspaces? Application insights, your key vault and the registry. So make sure you know that this is how they are integrated together, and that is the reason we are creating them along with this particular repo. Okay, so this is how it will look like for the initial structure. So now that's okay. Now we at least have some environment with us. Now the next part which I have to you if you go step by step is to authenticate with this machine learning with the help of that service connection. So you will come here in the project settings, you will create a service connection and set a scope for this machine learning workspace. So you create a service connection, automatic, make sure you select the machine learning workspace. Now, as we have this machine learning workspace, it knows that if you know that this is for your subscription, you have to just select that subscription. Okay. So once you select that, you know that this is at 1 ml HOL. Okay. So it should be able to detect that is there any machine learning workspace within that or not. So there is my name, same to your resource group. Okay, give some name which you want or which you want to refer within YAML pipeline, because this will be very helpful for you. And finally give access to that service connection. So this will be working as a contributor, not having full rights, just to do the job for you for ML perspective. Okay, so that was our first pipeline which created the. Okay, so this was the pipeline which we ran just now. Okay, now let's try to do the CI part of it. Now, for us to do the CI, as I've shown you that you can actually go and create both of them together. But what you want here is to have both the environments for ACI as well as AKS ready. But in our case, what we want to do is first of all, at least create the model and have that deployed on the container instance. Okay, so for that, this build pipeline, I only need the model creation, collection of an artifacts, and finally deploying them. Okay, so this is what I want as of now from the CI perspective. Let's try to do this from the build perspective. So let me rename this so that I can show you pipeline as well. So let me rename this as well as original. Okay, so now if you see, while you do this, you can always go and check what that file that was referring. So this is in pipeline folder and diabetic regression ci.yaml is which I have to select. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the new pipeline with the YAML file. Okay, so this is how you can do cross check as well if you don't remember the path in all for that particular YAML file. Okay, repository, existing YAML pipeline. Now here we have to give the name to it. Okay, now we want to have the CI, right? Pipeline, diabetic regressions, CI, right? So you have to just select that, continue on that. So you will have this particular pipeline with you. Okay. Remember again the naming convention, variable groups, whatever I've used to, and this is purely used for your model creation, training that particular model, whatever you have seen from train, evaluate, and the model registration perspective. Okay. So this is required for us to deploy on the ACI. Okay. Before we can actually deploy on ACI, this is what we need. Okay. And remember this checks for your service account, which is on ML, giving the scope for with the help of this task. So if you don't create for any reason, this will fail. Okay. So let's now, as I said, let's save it first before running this. Let's save it first. Again, coming back to our all pipelines, you will see that in all, and try to rename this by model train CI. Okay, so that was the original pipeline, right? So let me rename this to. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can show you parallelly how that will look like, and you can also go ahead and do some troubleshooting at your end. Okay, so let me set this train CI. Okay, and keep this at 2. That's okay. Again, one thing for every pipeline, go click on edit, try to validate that. If any errors within that, I think it will show you if something is not right, it will give you an error there. Okay, so far so good. We are just having the variables from one template, which is specific to diabetic regression, and another group which we are using for is our naming convention. Okay, so that is what the two things we are using. And these are the stage names. We are trying to have the model created, evaluate that, and have that ready as part of consumption on any deployment, right? So that is what this particular pipeline will do for us. So let me try to run now. If everything goes fine, this the connections are good and your naming conventions are good, this should go fine without any challenges. Okay, these are the two. So this is model, and you're actually training, evaluation, and finally getting that model register is what we do, right? So this is what is used for. So okay, first time it will ask you for the, because we want to have this as a part of the code, right? Permission granted while we run that. So team, in interest of time, I won't be able to go deeper into the ML data. Okay. So, but at your own pace, you can go and go through what the data is all about, how that particular YAML file looks like, and what are the linkages between different YAML files, because there are tons of data here. Okay, you will find at least I would say at least 10 to 15 YAML files, different YAML files are working together to create this environment. So it is important for you to understand end to end from the data perspective, how the data is flowing and all those things. And the bare minimum, we have some kind of test, but if you want to bring your own test or you want to test something on that, maybe some third party, just make sure you install those particular extensions on top of that. If you want to have the third party, anything on the monitoring perspective or anything on integration perspective. Also, something which I have not shown you while creation of the ML environment is we will need the ML extension as well. Okay, so you have to manage that installation while that is there in step-by-step instructions, but then you can just as an FYI, you can have the Azure ML instinct extension installed in your organization. So many a times what happens is this creates some kind of reports just to give you about your code, how good the code quality is, and so that is it will help you for if there is any security flaw or if there is any dependency you are uh, now here it failed because let's see what it was not able to find. Okay, so what it is saying is it failed on the authorization. Yeah, this can happen while while as I said, while I authenticate with that workspace. Okay, let me do and fix that from a service connection perspective. So let me first of all check this ML workspace, and then while I do the training, So these are quite common. Okay, so just make sure whatever the authorization you are giving with that particular client ID, it should be able to authenticate to your workspace. Okay, so in my case, I just want to create that particular service connection again because I already used that. Maybe I might have changed some parameters here. So that is the reason it failed. But no issues. Let us create the new one or try to re-authenticate it back. Okay, so that is the reason it failed, right? So our resource group was threshold, right? This was pointing to the test. That's okay. I think these are part of our experiments, what we do. There aren't access to all pipelines. Okay, so let's try to rerun that pipeline. So by steps also you can decide, like say suppose we failed here, right? So publishing, that means we are not able to get through. Similarly, if you might have failed somewhere here, then you have to check some code. And say suppose if something is not working on trigger, so you can check whether your access permissions or your service accounts is proper. So just to give you some pointers on how to troubleshoot this, I think that comes with experience, but just to give you for an FYI, that is how you can get this working. Okay, so let's see how we progress further. We got the connection now here. It got the subscription ID, so should be good now. Similarly, the other way to look at what is going on inside, or maybe this particular from the pipeline stage, you can also click on machine learning and check within that. Okay, so you will launch that studio. Is also you can check parallelly. Okay, so if it triggers something, you will be able to see here. And if anything goes here in terms of endpoints, you will see here. Okay, so those are all two things you have to look at while you are actually looking from the machine learning workspace. So let's go step by step. Oh, finally done. Took a lot of time because ideally it does not take that much time. Maybe this particular session got hang, the screen itself. So that's okay. I think sometimes these are the glitches which we have to handle. Okay, so the strap train evaluate that model is created. Okay, and then finally it will get through the other part. Let's see. And meanwhile, we can also check through the what we have as of now. So I believe we still have to wait for that this to trigger so that pipeline to be created because data sets and everything are available on the machine which is on DevOps. Now it has to just get that registered for that particular pipeline to flow. Okay, so first step is obviously to get that pipeline ID and all those things. So let's see. So overall, I can say I think you still have to look at least 1 hour for all those particular pipelines to get completed. And as we already said that this is more towards the QA along with the production environment. So you have to have the wait for or give some time for AKS cluster also to get ready. So that is where the whole point is like at times this becomes uh, like from 60 minutes to 2 hours as well. If the system is slow or the system is not behaving properly. So let's see from the train and evaluate perspective. Now this is actually going to that the part which you have seen train, evaluate and actually get that pipeline in the ML workspace. Okay, so at this point of time, this is with us as a code. So this with this part, it is actually trying to invoke that. And as I said, the important point to remember is if you have not created the ML service account or you are using just a single account for Azure connection as well as ML, then this will fail because the dependency on that particular task is to look for ML scope only. It cannot look at the subscription scope. So I'm getting the experiments ML. Let's see if there are any changes towards that. Yeah, the ML ops Python data set is also there now. Yeah. So while it is preparing, I think it is getting the data ready. And then while it goes on queued, I think this will wait for that cluster to scale to that particular, maybe whatever the nodes we might have given. If it is one, then obviously that node. Otherwise, this will scale to that 1 or 2, 3 nodes, whatever it requires. So that goes into the queue mode at that point of time. And then finally evaluation and registry mode. And this is the 3 step. And remember, this is also a pipeline from an ML perspective. OK, remember, this is the task which you are seeing. This is a part of your ML pipeline. So experiments are nothing but the code which runs for that particular or for that workflow. So if I have to check compute, we don't have model yet. Once we register that, that model will be available here. As of now, only this pipeline is what we have along with the data sets. See, this has gone to queued. Now, if you check on compute, this will be kind of scaling towards those cluster. Will come here soon because it requires some nodes to be available before it can actually do the work. And this is done at the runtime. That is the reason it takes some time to run those pipelines or the experiments, because we don't want them to run 24/7. See, it's showing resizing. So once it becomes from 0 to 1, then that goes through all the workflows. And these are all the configurations which are coming from whatever you have seen from the configurations, right? So that is the reason I said, like, going through the code is equally important to look at how these clusters are created, what are the default configurations. Also, while you deploy, even on the pre-prod or QA environments along with the production. So everything should or resident on the file before we can actually deploy them as a cluster. Oh, here I'm on the experiment and whatever this script is running through, right? So it gives you the build ID from where it got triggered, and then it gives me the script name as well, train aml.python. And with the help of the service principal, I'm trying to run this this particular experiment. Okay, so you can finally see the JSON as well as the ML once this completes, and the target is the train cluster and looking for the instance counts to 1. Let's wait for this. We have one now. Let's look at the experiment or pipeline now. Should get through. Yeah, it's running now. So at time you have to be very patient because this is all based on how the computes are created at runtime. So meanwhile, while this runs, I think I can also show you the code itself, the way steps we have did till now, right? So this step-by-step guide shows you, first of all, the variable group creation, right? You will put the parameters, right? Some name you have to give. Similarly for your workspace connection and the obviously the ACI minimum that is requirement as of now till pre-production. Okay. And it also explains you why this is required and how will you get that done. And from there onwards, I think that you have to create a service connection, which is for Azure. Okay. And get your first pipeline for environment creation there, which already I explained you. And then we have these resources ready with us. Finally, we got into the ML workspace service creation based on the scope which you created. So now we are this at this particular step. Okay, so just to recollect from what we had till now. Okay, so I think this is to be completed and this will be published. So, yeah. So you have the model. This is kind of a binary file, okay, which we will deploy on the ACI. We are getting this available as a part of artifact so that can be deployed on the ACI and also will be available as a part of a pipeline artifacts. And also before it does so, what I want to do is let me disable few of the pipelines, otherwise this will trigger all of them. So let me disable that scoring. ACI as well. ACI anyway, I think we can leave it as it is. I think let me disable CD because that I don't want to get triggered until we have the AKS available with us. Next, that's all. Web app as well. That's already disabled. Because the moment artifacts are available, this will trigger our CD part. So ideally, this is a required way of doing that. But as we are experimenting and getting things ready on hands-on lab, we want to understand that as well. That is the reason I want to have them disabled so that we understand till the CI and then go slowly with the ACI part first. Even if it runs, I think if AKS is not present, it will just fail. But just to avoid that, I'm just to rework, I'm just doing this. Okay, so we are done with this particular CI